Welcome everyone to another session of TriTech University. My name is Bill Steppen, and today we are going to be looking at how to do spot checks and cycle counts using the AIM software. Basic concept that I wanted to kind of go for in today's session is one of making use of the time that honestly we might have a little bit more of in this particular day and age of retail stores across the nation, very likely being closed to the general public, and wanting to make sure that the inventory that we have is accurate so that we get the best reports and the best advice from the program as far as what we need to replenish, what is selling, what is not, and so forth. If you have any questions, as always, during today's session, you have a GoToWebinar toolbar on the side of your screen, and feel free to use that. There's a questions box in there. Go ahead and type in any questions that you have on today's content, and that comes right along to me on screen. I'll do my best to answer those as we go along. If that GoToWebinar is taking up too much screen real estate on your screen and you're having a hard time seeing what I am presenting, there's going to be a little box on there. It's going to be a little orange box with a white arrow on it. You can click on that button, and that will shrink GoToWebinar's toolbar off to the side, so you should be able to see more of what I am discussing today. Hopefully we've taken care of any audio issues. There might still be a little bit of a desync between what you're seeing me say and what you're hearing me say, just because everyone's using the internet in this day and age for everything, working from home, school from home, entertaining. So we'll just have to kind of grin and bear it, myself included, since I am working from home, as you probably have noticed me doing these past couple of webinars. So that all being said, let's get right to it. We've done a number of webinars on full-fledged physical inventory counts. So you see me do this time and again where I go through and talk about how in the inventory module, there's a physical inventory element that I always call the full-scale count. So where you go in, you would do the whole kit and caboodle, where you would prepare for a physical, you would tell it what you're counting, you would then go out and do those counts. You would then either key those in either manually or using a handheld data collector like you've seen me use again in other webinars. The LBX10 data collector is the one that we're currently selling, although technically any data collector that can export SKUs and quantities in a comma delimited form can certainly work. And then you would update those. So kind of that four-step process: physical, take the count, enter it either manually or import it, and then update. What we're going to take a look at today, and shouldn't take too long, because I know obviously in this day and age, time is very much money, and you're probably working with reduced staff. So what we have kind of talked about time and time again with what we call our spot check is to take a few minutes in the morning and basically just go out and count a portion of your store, whether that's an end cap or a section of an aisle or a certain, basically just a small section of your inventory. And if you do that every morning, or at least a couple times every week, maybe on the weekends when you're maybe it's a little bit slower on the weekends, maybe it's slowest at your store first thing Monday morning. Whenever it's kind of slowest and you don't have too much more going on to catch up on, take a few moments and go out and count a portion of your store. Now, this is not a strategy that we've devised by any stretch of the imagination. You've probably heard it referred to as a cycle count, and we call it a spot check in the program. You can call it anything you want, just don't call it late for dinner. On the spot check program, basically you're going to be presented, excuse me, with a screen that looks like this. And the spot check works best if you are using a data collector, because you can see down at the bottom here, basically what it wants is some kind of import file. Now you would go out and you would find that file, and you can see how it's going to ask you then for that import file to have basically 2 points of detail. column A in an Excel spreadsheet would have SKU, and column B would have the quantity. And you would then point it to that file, and you would import that. If you would like a template, you can use the template program or the template button down here to generate a template, and it will come up in a queue where you would like that. Say, I'm just going to go ahead and put it right in my AIM folder, and I will call it Spot Check Template. And then we will go ahead and we will save that as we'll just leave it as is. Go ahead and hit save. And now I'm going to go ahead and open that. So let's hop into my File program. We'll go into the AIM folder on my C drive. There's the C drive. We'll go into the AIM folder, and we will go down and we will find the Spot Check template. There it is. So go ahead and open that up. And as we can see here, it's going to ask us for SKU and quantity, columns A and B. Now, if you are using a data collector I've been mentioning here, it would generate this program or this column, this setup automatically. What you can do outside of that is you can use that template button to create this file. And then what you could do is you could either type in the SKUs, or using a normal barcode scanner that's connected to the computer that you have the template on, you could go in and basically scan in, quote unquote, scan in those items. And basically when you do that, as you can see, when I scanned in my RT14, it goes ahead and puts that down. Let's say I scan another one and a third one. And let's say I scanned a music stand. Again, I'm using a music system. For those of you who aren't in the music business, the concept is exactly the same. It's just the content might be different. That's just kind of one strategy. Basically, I'm just scanning everything in, or alternatively, I could scan in my first item and then count how many of those are. So let's say I counted 17 of those. I could put that in the quantity column. The reason I'm mentioning that is back here in the program, when you're scanning that in, you'll notice there's an import method. So there's either SKU and quantity or SKU only. And if you choose SKU only, it's basically going to ignore column B. Now, I'll do it either way. So I'll leave it on SKU and quantity. Let's go back to that program. So we'll pull this back up, and we'll take out these other RT14s here, and we'll leave it back on the KB400N, and we'll say that we've got 6 of those. I'm going to leave that as is, so let's just go ahead and save this. And with that saved, we'll now come back into AIM. We will go to the import file, and we will use the find button to basically find that file that we just created and updated. So we'll go back into AIM. There's the Spot Check template. Open her up, and we will hit import. And when we hit import, basically what that will do is that will pull in those files there, or those fields. And let me just make sure that I actually did that. So let's hit refresh here. Found, not found, or could not be accessed. Probably because I have it open. Let me go ahead and close it then. Let's try that again. There we go. So you can see it imported that in. It also technically imported row 1 there, so you can see it's coming that up as SKU, and obviously there were no counts with that. So the way that the spot check works is, you remember how I put in RT14 and KB400N, and I put in quantities of 17 and 6. And basically what the program is going to do here is it's going to let you know what the computer says you should have. So in this case, it's letting me know that I should have technically 28 of those valve oils and 9 of those music stands. Now, at this point, I could see that and I could say, oh, I think we have some more valve oils in another portion of the store, and then we could go and count those and just make sure that we find those. But let's give a hypothetical and say that we couldn't find those. If we were to basically just hit save at this point, this would essentially update these items so that the computer quantity would get changed to reflect the counted quantity. And it'll do that in a way so that basically when you go out and look at the history of it, it'll basically transfer those missing items out as lost or stolen. If for whatever reason the counted quantity was greater than the computer quantity, certainly possible, it would use that same concept. It's basically they're being brought back in from lost or stolen. In other words, they've been found is kind of the idea with that. Robin is asking, does this take into account items on approvals and loaners? Yes, technically that computer quantity, Robin, is specific to what you should actually have in underneath the roof, if that makes sense. It's kind of the same concept as the physical inventory program, where basically the only things that it would say that you should be counting would be the things that are actually in the store. So it excludes things like approvals, loaners, items out on rental contracts, etc., things like that. Thank you so much, Robin, for the question. So yeah, that's kind of the idea with that. Now, what I'll do is I'm not going to save this. I'm going to exit this out, and let's go back to that that program, or so that we'll go back into that spot check template, open that back up here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and modify this, and we'll do it the other way. So I'm going to go ahead, first of all, I'm going to remove this column there, and let's say you were doing the strategy that I was mentioning, where you're basically just scanning those into this document. So when you scan something, it automatically does that return for you, as most scanners are programmed to do. So let's say I am scanning those barcodes. I don't have that barcode in front of me, but we'll just say I scan those items, and you can see basically as I would scan them, it would add them to this table. Let's go ahead and save that, close that out, and then we'll go back into the spot check program, modules, inventory, physical inventory, and spot check. We'll do the same thing. We will point back that in file to the spot check template. There it is. And we'll click import. But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this be SKU only, and I'm going to hit refresh. And you can see that it's basically tallying those up for me. So 6 RT14s and 3 KB400Ns. So it kind of does basically, it's the same thing. It's just what's the format of the file. If you're keying them in, let's say, for example, if you do have a barcode scanner, you could have someone be scanning them and then counting them and reporting back to someone who's sitting at the computer to key in the quantity column. This is assuming you're doing this without the benefit of a data collector, by the way. Or you could just scan them in so that they just go right down the list. And my kind of thought process with this is if you're using a wireless data collector, so that you don't have to bring all the inventory to the computer, that's assuming you have one. Now, let's talk about what if you don't have any of those things and you want to just create it manually. Well, you could do like I've been doing, and you could put in an Excel with that template and just key everything in. The other way that you could do this is you could forego the import entirely, and you could right click and you can manually add items. So by using the manual add, it'll ask you for putting in the SKU. And again, you could either type it in, scan it in, or key it in using F6. Again, I'll just go ahead and do an RT14 here. And then it's going to ask you for the quantity. So let's say that I've gone ahead, and in addition to those 6 that I counted, I found another 10. So I'm going to go ahead and put that in, and I'll say OK. And you'll see that it adds that to the counted quantity. So getting back to that example I gave before, where it comes up and says you have 16, but it thinks you should have 28, and you happen to find some more, you don't necessarily have to rescan, download the file, and import that. You can just right-click, and you could say manual add item. And let's say I do happen to go back to another display unit where I remembered, oh yeah, I've got those other valve oils on the other side of the store. We could go ahead and scan that in, or again, type it in, and say that, yes, I actually remember I have another 10 over on the other side of the store, and that brings my counted quantity up to 26. Again, it still says I should have had 28. Let's say that I searched high and low and I couldn't find those missing two, so I'm just going to write those off as having been lost or stolen. And that's kind of what would happen with this. So ultimately, if I were to hit save, this would adjust those numbers. Prior to saving, if you would like a printout of this, you can hit that print button, and this would basically give you kind of a snapshot of your cycle count. So I'll bring this up on screen just so you can kind of see what this would look like. And as you can see here, it's letting us know the SKU, the description, the computer quantity, the hour price, and the cost. So basically what it has as far as those computer counts with a grand total with that. So then we would hit save. That would then go ahead and update those. So now if we go ahead and just take a look at an inventory history of, let's say, the RT14, we will see that it will have a line item here of transferred out as lost or stolen with a quantity of 2. So that would have gone ahead and updated those numbers. And if we go ahead and bring up the details of that, we'll see that it will come up with that now quantity on hand of 26. So basically it goes ahead and makes those adjustments. Brandy has a question. Could this be used for doing a full inventory count as well? Yes, it could, Brandy. That's really not its intention, though. So the intention of the spot check is kind of just throughout the week, throughout the month, and just maybe count a few items here and there, and that will just basically make sure that it's more accurate throughout the year. Now, to answer the question, we would still technically recommend you do a full-scale physical, but the spot check does, in fact, update what we call the physical inventory date on the inventory record. You can see me highlighting that here. And that is a good way to see what inventory has gone for some time without having been counted. So yes, technically this does count as a physical inventory count, but it would be recommended both by myself, by your CPA, any other business strategists that you might have, that you do at least one full physical inventory count here, just to kind of make sure that those numbers are in fact all accurate. And that way, you're not relying on the spot check to come up and show you what you've counted, because it could let you know, hey, you have these other items in your inventory that we think you have. If you don't actually put them into the spot check, you'll never know that they're there. So that's kind of the idea with that. So hopefully that helps there, Brandy. Thank you so much for the question. Jennifer asks, how often do most AIM users conduct full inventories? I couldn't give you any statistics on the AIM community at large. I know it's recommended to usually do 2 full physical inventory counts a year, one at the beginning of your fiscal year, usually when your inventory is lowest, and then maybe one halfway through. I would hope that most AIM users conduct at least 1 inventory a year. I do happen to know that that is not the case, but that's just because we're all victims of this wonderful slave master called the 24-hour time clock, and we only have so many hours in the day. So that being said, it's certainly encouraged, and by using this spot check, as I've mentioned throughout the course of the year, this can make a full physical inventory more seamless, less problematic, because hopefully by doing this, you'll catch problems when they're very small before they become very large. So hopefully that helps there with that answer, Jennifer. I know I can't really answer your question directly, but at least hopefully that can give you an idea of how often to use both the spot check and the full-scale count. Kaylin, hopefully that's how it's pronounced. If it's not, I apologize. But Kaylin asks, how often do you recommend doing spot checks? And really the benefit and the beauty of a spot check is you can do it very quickly, especially if you have that data collector. So like I was saying, you could do this first thing every morning and just count a section of your inventory and get it cranked out and basically just update and ensure that those numbers are accurate a little bit at a time each day throughout the course of the week and the month and the year. Now, is it realistic to do a spot check every morning? Certainly not. There are other things that you need to take care of when you get there into the store first thing. So I usually shoot for maybe one a week. And if nothing else, that gives you basically 52 spot checks that you could do throughout the course of the year, which again makes those one or two physical inventory, those full scale physical inventory counts that you do that much more accurate. Robin asks, are there any reports for spot check other than what's printed when you save? Not necessarily the spot check in particular, but I do want to mention, Robin, the report that goes off of that physical inventory date that you can use as a strategy for ensuring that everything is getting counted. If we go into reports and inventory and current inventory, we're going to take a look at the inventory count by category report. Now, this report is what you can use kind of as your go-to report for finding what you have in stock at the present moment. This is a real-time report. You'll notice there's no date ranges or anything like that it's asking for, no analysis date of what the inventory was as of a certain time, because this is a real-time report for a real-time system. That being said, it does have down at the bottom here a spot where you can say only list items that have a physical inventory date prior to, and then you can put in a date there into that field. Let me get rid of that drawing because it seems harder to read these things when they are actually highlighted. But by putting them there, let's say that you put this in as of the beginning of the month, basically anything that hasn't had a count since April 1st would show up on the report and let you know, hey, these are probably things that we should focus on over the next couple of weeks and months to count. So that way you can make sure that you've got counts of those and that they are at least up to date based on what you were able to count. Now, obviously, the counts are only as good as our eyeballs. So if people, I'm not saying this happens, but saying it can happen, if people pick up a product off of its regular shelf area, and then they're walking around the store with it, they decide, oh, I don't want this anymore, and they put it down in a completely different area. If that goes, missing, it's going to wind up having that quantity overall reduced when you do the count. But like I was also alluding to, if that happens to be counted later on, and put back where it normally goes, then that can increase the quantity back when you do the next spot check or cycle count or full scale inventory count. So hopefully that kind of works itself to balance everything out. And that gets back to the question that I believe it was Kaylin has, which she says I did pronounce it correctly. Very good. The more often you do them, the better your inventory levels will be. So that being said, and this is completely outside of the software, where was I going with that? Completely outside of the software. If you do happen to find something, in your store that's completely, not where it normally would be, I would almost recommend saying, hey, maybe we should count this item just to make sure it's accurate. So you could almost use that as well as a strategy for doing cycle counts. You could say, put that on the shelf for the next morning. And one other thing I should mention is technically you don't have to wait for the morning to do a spot check or a cycle count. You could do that right away. The main thing is just basically ensuring that what you count and then what you key in as that count is going to come up with the same amount as the computer would have. So to be able to do that without having any receiving happening or any sales happening, usually first thing in the morning is probably the best time to do that, unless you've got, that gung-ho person who comes in every morning to browse the wares every day. Not that that's, again, a bad thing, but they're probably not buying if they're doing that. They're probably just browsing. So Robin asks, does the spot check update serialized inventory. And you may have noticed there, Robin. Let's go back to that program. So let's go back. Let's use the on-screen buttons this time. So we'll go to modules, inventory, and physical inventory, and the inventory spot check. You might have noticed that there is an option here to include serials in the printed report, and technically this can show you serial numbers that you scan when you're doing the spot check. However, this really wouldn't update them because basically this is just ensuring that you kind of have them. So the concept there is if you scan a barcode for a serialized item and it doesn't come up with the details of it, then that's a good way to know that this serial number does not exist in your system. You would then need to go and receive that serial number because the serial number alone, unfortunately, just isn't enough for the system to just update it. Basically, you'd have to go in and you'd have to tell it what you're receiving it under as far as a normal SKU or model number. And the opposite is also technically true because we're not really pre-loading in what the serial numbers are that you have into this list for comparing against like you would with a full-scale physical. This goes back to that other question that was posed to just kind of replace full-scale physicals. And so I really wouldn't recommend this for spot checking serialized inventory. You can certainly spot check it to see if you have it, but this isn't going to let you know or alert you to any serial numbers that might be missing. So hopefully that answers that question there, Robin. Thank you so much again for the question. That does pretty much kind of wrap up what I wanted to talk about with the spot check program. So hopefully this has been helpful. Again, it's just something that you can kind of quickly crank out a couple times a week or at least a couple times a month just to make sure your inventory is nice and accurate. This coming, let's see, I believe it is this coming Thursday, I will be doing a webinar on min and max strategies, just kind of basics with that. I have done other webinars in the past on min and max, so if you've attended that in the past, this is probably going to be a rehash, but this is really just a way, I'm not going to go into as much detail on Thursday as I have in the past on mins and maxes, really just kind of making sure that people understand the concept of what the min and maxes are and how the program can help tweak those for more accurate reordering strategies based on sales history. So that's what we'll be talking about on Thursday. And then next week, I'll be getting into daily balancing strategies, how to use the bank reconciliation program. And I'll be announcing more webinars following that as well here, hopefully by the end of this week. So stay tuned to that webinar calendar in our member portal. Go ahead and sign up for those if they would be of interest to you. And again, if there's any webinars that we can do to help you out in this new normal that we're hoping is not normal, but probably is, at least for the next month or two, let me know. Email me at training@tritechretail.com. Respond right to the GoToWebinar email that you get kind of following this up if that would be helpful, because that does get its responses directed to me if I'm not mistaken. I've been wrong before with the GoToWebinar's emailing functions. Or just give me a call. You can reach me at our normal sales line, 800-670-1736. I'd love to hear from you if there's any webinars that we can do for you to help you out, not only for the short term, but obviously for the long term. AIM is a long-term solution, and it can be used for any store, large and small. So we want you to get the most out of your investment with it. Our phones are always ready to take your call, and if you need to, technically, you could even submit that as a case using the submit a case request on our website as well. Those would ultimately get directed back to me if you would find that helpful to kind of type it out and know that it's going to get through, because I know sometimes email can be fickle. So definitely let us know. We're here for you, and we're not going anywhere. Thank you so much for attending. My name's Bill Steppen, and I'll see you on Thursday. Have a good one.